I still think about this night more than I would like to admit. Even though it happened years ago, it left a mark on both me and my brother that didn't fade easily. At the time, I didn't fully understand what fear really was. I was a child, and like most kids, I thought bad things happened far away to other people, or only in movies. That night changed that belief in a very quiet but powerful way. It was New Year's Eve, 2018. I was about 9 years old, and my little brother was 6. We were at a friend's house watching fireworks from her back garden. It was one of those nights that felt special. The air was cold but exciting. Fireworks popped and cracked in the sky, lighting everything up in flashes of red, blue, and gold. Adults were laughing somewhere inside the house, and for a while, everything felt safe and happy. We stayed until around 10 at night. It wasn't too late, and our house was very close. The walk home was only about 4 minutes. We had done it many times before, even when it was dark, and we could usually see our house from part of the street. Our neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was familiar. Familiar places make you feel brave, even when you're young. We said goodbye and started walking home. I remember holding my brother's hand, swinging it slightly as we walked. We were talking about the fireworks, arguing over which ones were the best. The street was quiet, but that wasn't unusual. Most people were inside celebrating. The sky was dark, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. As we got closer to our house, my brother suddenly stopped talking. His hand tightened around mine. "Who's at our house?" he asked. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids ask random questions all the time, and I assumed he was just imagining things. "Mom," I said without even looking up. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Well, who's she outside with?" That's when I looked up. I remember the confusion hitting me first, before the fear. I saw 2 men leaning against the wall in front of our house. They looked to be in their late 30s, maybe older. They were strangers. I had never seen them before. My neighbor at the time often threw parties, especially on holidays. People were always coming and going from her house. Because of that, my brain immediately tried to explain it away. I assumed they were friends of hers, maybe taking a break outside. "I don't know," I said to my brother, trying to sound calm. I squeezed his hand and kept walking. We were maybe 20 feet away from our front door when everything changed. The men suddenly stood up, not slowly, not casually. They pushed off the wall and started walking toward us. And then they started barking, not laughing, not shouting words, barking like dogs. My heart jumped into my throat. I didn't stop to think. I didn't try to understand. I grabbed my brother and ran. We turned around and sprinted back down the street as fast as we could. My brother was crying now, his small legs struggling to keep up. I didn't look back. All I could think about was getting away. At the end of our street, there was a narrow passage that led to the back gardens. We crossed the road and ducked behind the end house, pressing ourselves against the wall, trying to stay hidden. My chest hurt from running, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Yes, I had a phone. I know it sounds strange now, but my parents had given me one for emergencies. I was only 9, but in that moment, it felt like the most important thing in the world. I called my mom. She answered, annoyed. I could hear it in her voice. She thought I was joking around, trying to scare her on New Year's Eve. I tried to explain, my words tumbling over each other. She wasn't listening. She told me to stop messing about. She said she was going to open the door to prove no one was there. I heard the front door open through the phone. Everything went quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard her yelling, "What the are you doing sitting on my wall?" Her voice was sharp, angry, protective. I felt a strange mix of relief and fear all at once. I could hear the men apologizing frantically through the phone. Their voices sounded panicked now. Then my mum shouted again, even louder. "And why the Are you barking and chasing my children?" There was more shouting, more apologies. Then she told me they ran off down a different street. My brother was frozen. He wouldn't move. The adrenaline that had carried me through the run was gone, and suddenly my legs felt weak. I couldn't carry him. I didn't know what to do. Eventually, we made it back home. My mom hugged us both so tightly it hurt. She kept asking if we were okay. She asked what they looked like. We asked neighbors if they had seen anything, but no one had. It was like the men had vanished. After that night, our curfew changed. We weren't allowed out past 8 anymore. My mom said the men didn't seem drunk, but they didn't stick around long enough for her to be sure. That detail scared me more than if she had said they were drunk. Drunk people are careless. These men had been deliberate. For a while, life went back to normal, or at least it tried to, but something had shifted. Not long after that, I was playing in the same back area with a friend. She was around 7. Behind our houses were back gardens, garages, and a circular road that wrapped around the garages. It was a place kids played all the time. We sat near an elderly neighbor's garage, talking and messing around like children do. A fully tinted van drove into the area. We noticed it, but we didn't think much of it. Vans came and went. Maybe it was there to fix something. We ignored it and kept playing. At some point, we started skipping along the road, laughing, forgetting about the van completely. Then it came back. It drove slowly behind us. We moved, and it followed. It chased us 3 times around the back area. Each time my heart beat faster. We didn't scream. We didn't know what to do. We just ran and laughed nervously, pretending it was a game because the idea that it wasn't was too scary to face. After the 3rd time, we had the sudden realization that we could leave the back area and close the gate behind us. We did exactly that, slamming it shut and running home. We didn't tell anyone, not properly. It was brushed off. Kids exaggerate, adults think. Maybe it was nothing, but now, looking back, I can't help but wonder. We moved shortly after. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. What I do know is that after those events, my brother changed. He became anxious. He was scared to go anywhere alone. He needed someone with him, even for short walks. That fear stayed with him for years. It's gotten better now, but it took time. As for me, I learned something early. I learned that danger doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's strange, sometimes it wears the face of a normal street on a normal night. Nothing physically happened to us, we were lucky, but the fear was real. And the memory of those men barking, of that van chasing us, still lingers in the back of my mind. Some nights, when it's dark and quiet, I still think about it. And I still hold my breath, just a little, when I walk past places that once felt safe. I'm 22 now, but this happened not too long ago, and it's something I still think about more than I'd like to admit. It didn't happen late at night or in some abandoned place. That's part of what makes it stick with me. It happened in the morning, in daylight, in a place that should have been safe. It was a normal morning. Nothing felt off when I woke up. I got on the bus like I always did, rode it to the stop near campus, and stepped off with my headphones already in my ears. I had class and study plans ahead of me, deadlines and stress like any other student. My mind was focused on ordinary things. There was nothing in me that felt alert or defensive. From the bus stop, it was about a 5-minute walk to the university. The campus is massive. You can see it clearly from a distance. Big buildings, walls, signs everywhere. It's not something you can miss or confuse with anything else. That detail matters. As I was walking, a dirty little minivan pulled up beside me. At first, I didn't feel fear. The van looked rough, but not unusual. Around my area, there are plenty of vans like that, hauling tools, scrap, random junk. The man inside looked to be in his 40s. His clothes were grimy, his face tired. Nothing about him screamed danger right away. He rolled down the window and asked politely where the university was. I took my headphones out, smiled, and pointed straight ahead. I told him it was right there, just a few steps away. He offered me a ride. I said no thanks, told him I was basically already there. It felt like a normal interaction. Slightly awkward maybe, but harmless. He drove off. I put my headphones back in and kept walking, I already forgetting about him. About a minute later, the van stopped in front of me again. This time he didn't ask for directions. He just told me to get in. Said he'd give me a ride. I smiled again, repeated myself, said no thanks. I pointed toward the campus again. I told him it was right there. He stared at me for a few seconds longer than before, then drove off. That's when the feeling started to change. I kept walking. My phone rang, and it was my friend calling. He said he'd be late and told me to wait in the cafeteria. I answered, distracted, half listening, still moving forward. Then the van came back for the third time. He pulled up beside me while I was on the phone. He asked again if I wanted a ride, but his tone was different now. He wasn't casual, he wasn't friendly, he looked tense. His eyes moved over me slowly, from my chest down to my feet, like he was measuring something. It didn't feel like an offer anymore. It felt like an expectation. I pulled the phone away from my ear and told him the university was literally 2 steps away. I pointed again. I said thanks, but no. He didn't argue. He just stared for a few seconds and drove off. At that moment, I didn't fully register how strange it was. I was still thinking about classes, assignments, everything waiting for me. The road was nearly empty, but I didn't connect the dots yet. As I walked, the realization hit me slowly. He wasn't lost. If he wanted to get to campus, he'd already be there. He'd passed it. He'd looped around. More than once. He was circling me. That's when confusion turned into anger. I felt stupid for being polite. Then concern crept in, sharper and colder. My body shifted into something like survival mode without me deciding to. I told myself that if he wanted to rob me, he could have already done it. The road was empty. He'd had chances. That didn't make me feel better. At the edge of the campus wall, he stopped me again. This was the 4th time. He told me to get in. Said he'd give me a ride. I looked him straight in the face and told him no. I told him he could go wherever the hell he wanted to go. My voice was firm, but inside I was shaking. He didn't look at my face. He stared at my hair, then my body, slowly, for a full 30 seconds. It felt endless, like a predator deciding something. I couldn't read his eyes. I didn't know if it was lust or something worse. I didn't want to know. That's when I noticed the rope. It was sitting in the passenger seat, small, easy to miss. But once I saw it, everything inside me dropped. My chest felt heavy, like I couldn't get enough air. For a split second, my mind filled with stupid, dangerous thoughts. I imagined jumping him, punching him, teaching him a lesson. That reckless hero instinct kicked in. The idea that because I'm a man, I should be able to handle it. That I couldn't let it slide. That I could control the situation if it came to that. I crossed the road quickly and slipped through the university gate, leaving the van behind me. But he didn't leave. The van pulled up near the campus wall and parked. I stopped just inside the gate, frozen. My hands were shaking. My emotions were everywhere at once. Fear, anger, confusion. Part of me even thought maybe I should have gotten in the van. Maybe I should have let him touch me so I could fight back when he dropped his guard. I felt ridiculous thinking it, but it was there. I actually turned around. I started heading back toward the gate. Then my phone buzzed. My friend messaged that he'd arrived and told me to hurry so we could find a good spot in the library. He called me right after. Hearing his voice snapped me out of it. I stopped, took a long breath, and walked back into campus instead of going back outside. I never saw the van again. Now, looking back, I know how reckless those thoughts were. That urge to be the hero wasn't strength, it was raw emotion. Men sometimes think they can handle sexual danger with force, like it's something they can fix. That's not true. Things can go wrong in seconds. I was lucky, very lucky, nothing happened to me. But that morning changed how I see safety, politeness, and instincts. It taught me that danger doesn't always look dramatic, and that sometimes the scariest moments are the ones where you almost make the wrong choice. If anyone reads this, remember this. Staying safe is not weakness. Walking away is not failure, and trusting your fear might be the thing that saves you. I've always been a night owl. Even after a long day, I feel more awake when the world starts to quiet down. Night has always felt peaceful to me, like everything slows enough for me to finally breathe. But that habit came with problems. And this happened on one of those nights when I learned that feeling safe doesn't mean you actually are. I had just gotten home from work late. It was well past midnight and the house was dark and silent when I walked in. My dog was unusually restless. He kept pacing, whining softly, moving from room to room like he couldn't settle. This wasn't normal for him. Usually, once I'm home, he relaxes. That night, he didn't. I figured he needed a walk. I checked the time and realized it was almost 2 in the morning. That gave me pause. I don't usually go out that late, but I reminded myself that I lived in a safe neighborhood, a quiet area. I'd gone out at night plenty of times before, just not this late. I told myself it would be quick, just around the block, in and out. I put his leash on, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The street was almost completely dark. The streetlights were far apart, and most houses had their lights off. Everything felt still, like the whole neighborhood was asleep. My flashlight cut a narrow beam through the darkness as we walked along the sidewalk. My dog stayed close to my side, alert but calm. At first, it felt fine. Then I heard voices. They were behind me. 2 young men talking quietly. I could hear their footsteps on the pavement. My heart dropped instantly. The sound felt loud in the silence, impossible to ignore. My throat tightened, and my body went stiff. What were the odds that I'd run into people at 2 in the morning and in the dark, and while alone? I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to look back and show fear. I didn't want to do anything that might escalate the situation. I just kept walking, slightly faster than before, pretending everything was normal. My dog noticed the change and tensed a little. His ears perked. The footsteps stayed behind me. Then it got worse. I heard them cross the street. The sound of their steps shifted, closer now, directly behind me instead of across the road. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like I could hear it in my ears. I calculated the distance without meaning to. They were close. Too close. Probably only a few seconds away if they decided to run. I started to panic. My mind raced through every possible option. Running felt like the worst idea. It would make it obvious I was scared. It might turn things into a chase. So I forced myself to keep speed walking, every muscle tight, every sense screaming at me to get somewhere safe. That's when one of them made a sound, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't a laugh. It wasn't a joke tone. It sounded deliberate, animal-like. It sent a shock of pure fear through my body. My adrenaline spiked instantly, my vision narrowing, my thoughts breaking into fragments. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept walking faster, almost shaking, my hand gripping the leash tightly. The growling continued behind me. Their footsteps stayed steady. They were following me, on purpose. I focused on the street ahead, praying I'd reach somewhere brighter, somewhere public. My every second felt stretched and unreal. My dog pulled slightly, sensing my fear, matching my pace. Finally, I reached a main road. Lights, cars, movement. The moment I stepped into the light, the sounds behind me stopped. I glanced back just enough to see them standing there, watching, before turning away and walking back into the darkness they came from. I didn't wait to see more. I moved quickly to the side of a nearby building and stayed there, pressed against the wall, breathing hard, listening. I waited until my heart slowed and my hands stopped shaking. I didn't feel safe going straight home, so I took a different route back, one I knew had more open spaces. That walk felt endless. The streets were darker there, almost pitch black in places. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow felt like it could be someone stepping out. I kept checking behind me, convinced they might reappear. But they didn't. I made it home safely. Once inside, I locked the door and just stood there for a long time, holding my dog, letting the reality of what almost happened sink in. At first, I told myself they were just dumb teenagers trying to scare someone. That explanation was easier to accept. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Who does that? Who follows someone alone at 2 in the morning in the dark and growls at them? That isn't harmless. That isn't normal. That's someone testing fear, enjoying it, or worse. Nothing happened, and I'm grateful for that. But that night changed how I see the quiet, changed how safe I feel when the world goes dark. I don't walk at night anymore, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what happens. It's knowing how close you came to something you'll never fully understand. It happened about 6 months ago, and even now I still think about it almost every night. I've replayed the whole thing in my head so many times that certain moments feel burned into my memory. At the time, I didn't think much of the day itself. It was quiet and normal, the kind of day where nothing feels out of place. My parents had left earlier that afternoon for a short trip, and I was staying at their house to take care of their dogs. I'd done it plenty of times before. The house was familiar, comfortable, and safe, or at least it felt that way. About an hour after my parents left, my boyfriend came over. It was already starting to get dark outside, the kind of early evening where the light fades slowly and the street lamps haven't fully taken over yet. The dogs were relaxed, sprawled out in their usual spots, and the house felt calm. Nothing seemed unusual. There was no reason to believe that the night would turn into something I'd still be questioning months later. At some point, I heard a car pull up on the street outside the house. That alone didn't mean much. Cars parked on the street all the time. Neighbors, delivery drivers, people turning around. I didn't even look out the window. But then there was a knock at the front door. Not a soft knock either. It was firm, deliberate. A moment later, the doorbell rang. My first instinct was to freeze. I don't open the door for strangers, especially not at night. Even though my boyfriend was there, something about the timing felt off. I hadn't been expecting anyone. I stayed where I was, hoping whoever it was would just leave. Instead, the knocking continued. The doorbell rang again, then again. The dogs went absolutely insane. They were barking like I'd never heard before, throwing themselves toward the front door, nails scraping against the floor. I could hear a man's voice through the door, muffled by the barking. He kept saying something like, "Hello," over and over again. The dogs were so loud that I couldn't make out his words clearly, but his tone was impatient, persistent. I went toward the front of the house with my boyfriend, mostly because I wanted to pull the dogs away from the door. They were losing it, and their panic was making my own nerves spike. There's a window right next to the front door, and as I moved closer, I tried to stay out of view. I remember thinking that if he didn't see me, maybe he'd leave. That was a mistake. The moment he saw movement inside, everything changed. He leaned closer to the door and suddenly started saying my first name, clear as day, not guessing, not asking vaguely. He said my name like he knew it. My stomach dropped. I remember my heart starting to race so fast it felt like it was in my throat. He kept saying it, asking if it was me, asking if I was home. The dogs were still barking, but I could hear him clearly now. He knew my name and he knew I was inside. I pulled away from the door immediately. The house didn't feel safe anymore. The darkness outside felt heavier somehow, like the night had closed in around the house. My boyfriend and I took the dogs upstairs, locking the bedroom door behind us. There's a window upstairs that looks down toward the front of the house, and we stood there, peeking through the curtains. The man was still there, standing on the porch, waiting. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I didn't recognize him. I was sure of that. He looked to be in his 40s, maybe older, dressed normally. Nothing that screamed danger at first glance. But the fact that he knew my name and wouldn't leave made everything feel wrong. We decided my boyfriend should talk to him instead of me. Part of me hoped that seeing another man would make him back off. My boyfriend opened the upstairs window and called down, asking what he wanted. The man ignored him and kept asking for me by name. He said he needed to talk to me. He needed to see me. Then he said he had something of mine. Those words sent a chill through me. My boyfriend asked what it was. The man didn't give a straight answer. He just kept repeating that he needed to see me, to give it to me. He said it like it was obvious, like I should know what he meant. My boyfriend told him to just leave it at the door. That should have been simple, normal, but the man pushed back. He asked how he'd know it would actually get to me if he didn't see me himself. My boyfriend asked how he would even know it was me if he didn't see my face. The man said he knew me, just like that. At that point, my fear turned into something colder. A heavy, sick feeling settled in my chest. This wasn't some confused delivery driver. This wasn't a wrong address. He knew my name. He knew where I lived. And he wasn't leaving. My boyfriend finally said we were calling the police. The change in the man's attitude was immediate. He looked angry, annoyed, like we'd wasted his time. Without another word, he walked back to his car and drove away. We stood there in silence for a long time after that, listening to the dog slowly calm down, waiting to see if he'd come back. He didn't. We checked every door and window, double-checked the locks, and kept the lights on for the rest of the night. After he was gone, the questions started. How did he know my name? I went through all my belongings, checking my wallet, my IDs, my passport. Nothing was missing. There was no logical explanation. I hadn't ordered anything. I hadn't spoken to anyone new. I hadn't posted my address anywhere. I've read enough true crime stories to know that jumping straight to something extreme doesn't always make sense, but that doesn't stop your brain from going there. The worst part isn't what happened. It's what didn't happen. The unanswered questions. The feeling that something could have gone very wrong if we'd opened that door. Even now, when I hear a knock late at night, my heart starts racing. I still wonder who that man was, why he came, and how he knew my name. And I don't think I'll ever really feel comfortable knowing that someone out there knew exactly where to find me. This happened to my friend not too long ago, and even though on the surface it sounds like one of those strange encounters you might brush off, the more you sit with it, the more uncomfortable it becomes. She still brings it up sometimes, not because anything dramatic happened, but because of the way it made her feel afterward. That lingering sense that something wasn't right, even if you can't fully explain why. She's 21, and like most people her age, her phone is practically an extension of her body. On that day, her battery was running low, and she stopped at a bus stand to charge it. It was one of those public charging points that people use while waiting for transport. The area wasn't empty, but it wasn't crowded either. People were coming and going, buses pulling in and out. The usual background noise you'd expect. And nothing about the setting felt unsafe at first. When she arrived, there was already another man using the charging point. He looked to be in his 40s. He was wearing sunglasses, even though it wasn't particularly bright out, which she noticed but didn't think much about. People wear shades for all kinds of reasons. He wasn't dressed unusually, didn't look aggressive, and at first, he didn't seem interested in her at all. She plugged in her phone and stood there, half distracted, scrolling aimlessly while waiting for the battery to go up enough to last her trip. The man beside her was fiddling with his phone, tugging at the cable like it wasn't coming loose easily. He kept adjusting it, pulling it out, plugging it back in, and muttering under his breath. Then he started talking. At least, she thought he was talking. That was the strange part. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't really looking at anyone. His head was tilted downward, his gaze hidden behind his sunglasses, fixed on the ground. His voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't a whisper either, just loud enough to be heard. He said something like, "You should take care of your belongings." She froze for a second, unsure if he was speaking to her at all. There were other people nearby. Maybe he was on the phone. Maybe he was talking to himself. She didn't respond. She just stayed quiet, pretending she hadn't heard anything. He finally managed to pull his phone out of the charging port, straightened up, and without looking at her, walked away. No explanation, no eye contact, nothing. At first, she felt a bit silly for feeling uneasy. The comment itself wasn't threatening. It could have been a general statement. Maybe he'd seen someone lose something earlier. Maybe it was just a poorly worded attempt at conversation. She tried to shake it off. A few minutes passed. She stayed where she was, still charging her phone, watching the buses come and go. Her guard lowered slightly. The moment seemed over. Then the man came back. This time there was no confusion about who he was talking to. He stopped right in front of her. Even though his eyes were hidden behind the shades, his body was clearly angled toward her. His voice was calm, almost flat, like he was reciting something he'd already decided to say. He told her she looked very beautiful. Her stomach tightened immediately. Compliments from strangers are always uncomfortable, but something about the timing made it worse. She hadn't acknowledged him earlier. She hadn't encouraged conversation. There was no reason for him to come back. Then he added something that made the moment shift from awkward to disturbing. He said, "But society will use you." There was no smile, no tone of concern that felt genuine, just a statement delivered like a warning or a judgment. Before she could respond, before she could even process what he meant, he turned around and walked away again. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. He disappeared into the crowd like nothing had happened. She stood there, phone still plugged in, feeling exposed and unsettled. The words replayed in her head over and over. What did that even mean? Was he trying to sound deep? Was he mocking her? Was it some kind of twisted advice? Or was it something else entirely? But the worst part wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it, the lack of emotion, the lack of context, the fact that he came back specifically to say that. as if it was important enough to interrupt his own departure. She left soon after, even though her phone wasn't fully charged. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. She kept checking behind her, half expecting to see him again, even though there was no logical reason to think he'd follow her. Later, when she told me about it, we went over every detail. The sunglasses, the lack of eye contact, the strange, almost scripted comments. None of it added up to anything concrete, and that's what made it stick in her mind. There was no clear threat, no obvious danger, just a moment that felt off in a way that's hard to explain. Encounters like that are easy to dismiss from the outside. People say things like, he was just a random creep, or he was probably mentally unwell, or you're reading too much into it. And maybe that's true, but when you're the one standing there, alone, being singled out by a stranger who speaks in vague warnings and then disappears, it leaves a mark. Even now, she avoids that bus stand when she can. And whenever a stranger speaks to her in public, especially without looking directly at her, she feels that same tightness in her chest. Not because of what might happen, but because of what could be meant. Sometimes the scariest moments aren't loud or violent. Sometimes they're quiet, confusing, and over in seconds, leaving you alone with a feeling you can't quite shake, and words you'll never fully understand. When I first moved into my new apartment complex, I felt a cautious kind of relief. I've lived in places before that were genuinely unsafe. The kind where you don't relax even after locking your door, where you always keep one ear open for footsteps in the hallway. Compared to those places, this complex seemed calm, clean, quiet. The buildings were well maintained. The lighting was decent and people mostly kept to themselves. Still, as a young adult woman living alone, I never let my guard down completely. That's just how I've learned to exist in the world. My building sits right next to another one, and beyond that is the dog park. It's a nice setup, honestly. There's a fenced area for dogs to run around, some picnic tables, and a small grilling space nearby. The building between mine and the dog park has balconies that face directly toward the park. From those balconies you can see everything. Every person who walks in, every dog that runs around, every moment that happens out there. When I first moved in, I started noticing a man who would sometimes sit at one of the picnic tables near the dog park. He wasn't doing anything obvious. He would just sit there. No phone, no book, no dog, just sitting and watching. At the time, I didn't think much of it. People enjoy the outdoors in different ways. Maybe he liked the fresh air. Maybe he was people watching. I told myself it was normal and didn't let the thought linger. As time went on, though, I started feeling uneasy. I walk my dog several times a day. She's a German Shepherd mix, big enough to look intimidating, which I honestly appreciate. She makes me feel safer, especially at night. She's not aggressive, but she's alert, and people tend to give us space when they see her. That's always been a comfort to me. The first time I noticed the man watching me from his balcony, it caught me off guard. I was at the dog park, letting my dog run around, when I felt that familiar sensation of being watched. You know the feeling, the one that makes your skin prickle even before you fully understand why. I looked up and saw him standing on his balcony, leaning slightly on the railing, looking directly at me and my dog. I told myself I was overthinking it. Balconies face the park. Of course, people are going to look out sometimes. I brushed it off, but then it happened again and again. 4 separate times I caught him watching us. Once I saw him look out his window, notice me in the dog park, and then open his balcony door and step outside. The timing was too precise to feel like coincidence. The moment he came out, my stomach dropped. I immediately leashed my dog and left the park. I didn't run, but I didn't linger either. I just wanted to get out of his line of sight. Another time I was walking near the fence when he suddenly appeared right there, standing close to it. I hadn't seen him approach. 1 second he wasn't there, and the next he was. That startled me more than I like to admit. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at my dog. When he did speak, it was broken English. I couldn't place his accent exactly. He asked me if my dog would bite. The question alone made me uncomfortable. I didn't know how to respond, so I half-jokingly said, maybe. I wanted to discourage him, to make it clear that approaching us wasn't a great idea. Instead, he kept talking. He asked me what I do for work. He asked where I live. Then he asked, more than once, if I was single. Each time I felt my chest tighten a little more. I lied and told him my boyfriend lived with me. It wasn't true, but it felt safer than telling him I lived alone. I hated that I felt the need to lie, but I hated even more how exposed I felt in that moment. After that interaction, I became hyper-aware of my routines. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way he would appear on his balcony when I took my dog out. The way he seemed to know when I was around. I began changing where I parked my car, using different stairwells, varying the times I took my dog out. I didn't want to be predictable. I didn't want to make it easy for anyone to track my movements. The incident that really pushed me over the edge happened one night around 9. I had just gotten home from work. I was tired, ready to relax, but my dog needed to go out for a quick potty break. I grabbed her leash and stepped outside, telling myself it would be quick. As I walked down the sidewalk toward the dog area, I glanced up at the building with the balconies. That's when I saw him. He was standing on his balcony in complete darkness. No lights on, no movement, just his silhouette, watching. Something about that image sent a chill through me. It wasn't just that he was there. It was the intention behind it. He wasn't accidentally catching a glimpse of the park while enjoying the evening. He was standing in the dark, deliberately watching. I didn't even take my dog to the park that night. I turned around and went back inside as calmly as I could manage. Once my door was locked, I leaned against it, heart racing, trying to convince myself I was being dramatic, but the fear didn't go away. I kept replaying everything in my head. The repeated watching, the sudden appearances, the personal questions, the way he seemed to know when I was outside. I knew logically that I didn't have proof of anything concrete. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't followed me inside. But fear doesn't always wait for proof. It builds slowly, quietly, until you start changing your behavior without even realizing it. Until you're constantly scanning your surroundings. Until you feel tense in places that are supposed to feel safe. I started questioning myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I unfairly judging someone who just didn't understand social boundaries? Was I projecting past experiences onto this situation? At the same time, I couldn't ignore how deeply unsettled I felt, how my instincts kept warning me that something wasn't right. I've learned the hard way that ignoring those instincts rarely ends well. Now I find myself wondering what to do next. Do I bring this up with apartment management, even though I don't have solid evidence? Do I risk being seen as overreacting, or worse, being dismissed entirely? Or do I keep altering my routines, living in a constant state of alertness, hoping nothing escalates? I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to feel watched every time I step outside with my dog. I don't want my home to feel like a place where I have to be on guard. And maybe nothing will ever happen. Maybe this man is harmless. Maybe he'll move away or lose interest. But the fact that I'm even asking these questions tells me something important. Sometimes danger doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the form of a presence that feels wrong, a pattern that doesn't quite make sense, a gaze that lingers too long. And even if nothing ever comes of it, that feeling alone is enough to change the way you move through your world. I don't know what the right answer is yet. All I know is that I'm tired of feeling like I have to constantly look over my shoulder in a place that's supposed to be home. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I got sick on a school day. It wasn't anything serious, just one of those illnesses where you feel weak, a little feverish, and miserable enough that going to school isn't an option. My parents both worked full-time, and neither of them could take the day off. After a short discussion that I overheard from my bedroom, they decided I would stay home alone. They made it very clear that I was not to open the door for anyone, no matter what. I remember them repeating all the usual warnings about strangers, about pretending not to be home, about staying inside and keeping the doors locked. At that age, staying home alone felt like a strange mix of freedom and unease. I was old enough to understand basic rules, but young enough that the house felt bigger and quieter without adults in it. After my parents left, I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat in the front room watching television. The front room had a large bay window that looked directly out onto the street. It was a main road, fairly busy, with a row of small shops across the way. Throughout the day, people walked past constantly. Shoppers, delivery drivers, people heading to work or stopping for a coffee. At first, I didn't think much of it. I lay on the sofa, half watching cartoons, half dozing off. But after a while, I started to feel uncomfortable, knowing that people could easily see into the room. Even though the glass was slightly reflective, I still felt exposed, like I was on display. Eventually, I stood up and pulled the curtains together just enough to block the view, leaving a small gap so some light could still come in. As I did that, something caught my attention. A man was walking past the house. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. He had a beard, glasses, and was wearing a green knitted jumper. There was nothing obviously wrong about him at first glance, but something about the way he moved made me pause. He walked slowly, not in a rush like most people on that street. His eyes seemed unfocused, like he wasn't really looking at the shops or the road just ahead of him. I watched him pass and then turned back to the TV. About 10 minutes later, I noticed him again. He was walking past in the same direction as before. That immediately struck me as odd. The street wasn't circular. To walk past the house twice in the same direction meant he must have turned around somewhere nearby and come back. I felt a small knot of unease form in my stomach. But I told myself I was overthinking it. People walk back and forth all the time. Maybe he forgot something. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Another 10 minutes passed. Then he appeared again. This time, he stopped. He stood at the edge of our driveway and looked directly at the front window. Even though the curtains were mostly closed, I felt certain he could see the outline of the room. He stood there for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only 30 seconds. My heart started to pound. I crouched slightly, staying out of sight, barely breathing. Then he walked toward the front door. Our house was an old Victorian sandstone building with heavy storm doors at the front. You needed a key to open them from the outside. As he passed the window near the door, he leaned slightly and peered inside. I froze. He knocked on the door a few times. The sound echoed through the quiet house, loud and sharp. Something inside me screamed not to answer. I stayed completely still. The TV murmured quietly behind me. He knocked again, harder this time. Then he moved to the front window and started banging on the glass. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. My ears rang with fear. I remember thinking about my parents' words, about not answering the door, about pretending not to be home. Then I saw the change in his face. It was subtle but unmistakable, a look of realization, like something had just occurred to him. His eyes shifted, scanning the side of the house. The back door, my parents never locked it during the day. We had a dog, and they liked him to be able to go in and out freely. That thought hit me like ice water. But I didn't stop to think. I ran through the house as quietly and quickly as I could, my socks sliding on the floor, my chest tight with panic. I reached the kitchen and grabbed the back door handle. My hands were shaking so badly that it took effort to get the key into the lock. Just as I turned it and locked the door, I heard the handle move. Someone was trying to open it. The handle rattled violently, twisting back and forth. Then came the banging. Loud, desperate bangs that shook the door in its frame. I stumbled backward and collapsed onto the floor, curling up into a ball, my arms wrapped around my head. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just listened. He tried the door again and again. Then he moved to the windows. I could hear him testing them, one by one, fingers scraping against glass, a dull thud as he pushed, checking for weakness. Every sound felt amplified, every second stretched out painfully long. I remember thinking that this was it, that he was going to find a way in, that my parents weren't coming home for hours. After what felt like forever, the noises stopped. I stayed on the floor, unmoving, too afraid to lift my head. Minutes passed. 10, 15. I didn't know how long. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to crawl to the back door and peek through the glass. He was gone. I didn't move from that kitchen until my parents came home. When they finally did, I broke down crying and told them everything. The police were called, but nothing ever came of it. No one was caught. No one matched the description exactly. The man was never seen again. Even now, years later, I still think about that day, about how close it came to being something much worse, about how a single memory locking that back door may have saved my life, and about how quietly danger can arrive on an ordinary day when you're just a sick kid watching TV at home. When I was in high school, I had a friend who felt completely different from everyone else in my life at the time. Before high school, I had been in the same class with mostly the same students since grade school. That group was intense. Everyone was serious, competitive, and obsessed with grades. School wasn't just school to them, it was their entire identity. We were known as a high-performing class, even more so than the officially labeled gifted students. I remember talking to some of those kids once, and they told me their teacher would constantly compare them to us, saying things like, "Why can't you be more like that class?" That environment shapes you. You stop seeing school as something normal and start seeing it as a constant test of worth. Nobody talked about messing up or hiding grades or just not caring. Everyone followed the rules, chased perfection, and stayed in line. Then I met her. She didn't care. Not in a reckless way, but in a human way. She had a personality. She laughed easily. She didn't panic over grades or exams. She told me stories about how she planned to avoid her parents when report cards came out, how she delayed opening mail, how she created excuses and bought herself time before the truth came out that she wasn't doing well in school. To me, that was shocking. Nobody I knew did that. Nobody admitted failure, let alone strategized around it. Being around her felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. I spent a lot of time at her house. It became normal for me to be there after school, on weekends, whenever. It didn't take long for me to notice her neighbor. At first, he didn't stand out in any obvious way. He was what you might call friendly. He waved, he said hello. Sometimes he tried to start small conversations from his driveway or porch. The first few times, I waved back. I said hello if he greeted me first. It felt polite, normal. She told me not to, not casually, not jokingly. She told me very clearly not to talk to him or pay attention to him. At the time, I didn't understand how serious she was. Creepy people weren't new to me. I already knew that some adults made you uncomfortable. But in my mind, there were clear lines. He wasn't coming onto her property. She wasn't going to his house. He wasn't touching her or following her down the street. So I didn't see the harm. I should have listened. The longer I spent time there, the clearer it became that something was wrong. It wasn't what he did exactly. It was what he knew. He knew things he shouldn't have known. He commented on her schedule, on where she'd been, on details that weren't shared with him. He'd say things like, "You were late to class this morning," or "Did you have fun camping this weekend?" They weren't questions meant to start a conversation. They were statements, proof that he was watching, and it was always about her. I was there almost as much as she was, sometimes more, but he barely acknowledged me. A wave, maybe, a hello. That was it. His focus never shifted. It stayed locked on her every time. What made it worse was how careful he was. He never crossed obvious boundaries. He stayed on his driveway, on his porch. He didn't step onto their property. He didn't follow her down the street. From the outside, everything looked innocent, like it could all be explained away as neighborly interest or coincidence. That's what made it terrifying. It felt intentional, controlled, like he understood exactly where the line was and made sure to stand just on the safe side of it. To me, it started to feel like the house itself was the threat, not just the man. That every time she walked past it, even when he wasn't outside, she was being watched, observed, logged. That kind of fear doesn't need action to exist. It lives in anticipation, in routine, in the knowledge that someone knows more about your life than they should, and you can't prove it's wrong enough for anyone to step in. As far as I know, nothing ever happened. No confrontation, no escalation, no crime anyone could point to. But that image of him standing in his driveway, calling out casually, still lives in my mind. Not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't have to do. Some people think horror needs a moment where everything explodes. Violence, chases, screams. But sometimes horror is quieter than that. Sometimes it's a presence you can't escape, a gaze you can't return, a house you have to walk past every single day, knowing someone inside is paying attention in a way that isn't right. And even now, years later, when I think about that friend and her house, I don't remember the good afternoons or the laughter first. I remember the driveway, and the feeling that being watched doesn't always come with footsteps behind you. Sometimes it comes with a smile, a wave, and someone who never once steps out of place.